The classroom hummed with its usual end-of-day restlessness, pencils tapping, sneakers squeaking, whispered jokes bouncing between desks. At the front, Mr. Daniels tried to steady his hand as he lifted a piece of chalk to the board. He had planned this lesson carefully, determined to make sense of the headlines about the nation's growing crisis. But as the words began to form, his voice faltered. He spoke about families struggling to put food on the table, about neighbors losing jobs, about the weight pressing down on ordinary people. His throat tightened. The chalk squeaked across the board before slipping from his hand, clattering against the floor. For a moment, no one moved. The students, used to seeing him composed and confident, leaned forward in surprise. Mr. Daniels pressed a hand against his temple, trying to push through, but the truth poured out in fragments. He wasn't just teaching a lesson in civics. He was carrying the pain of countless lives, and it cracked through his words. His shoulders sagged under the invisible weight, his eyes glistening as silence swallowed the room. A place usually filled with chatter and laughter now felt heavy, sacred. The students realized they were not just witnessing a teacher explaining history, but a human being breaking open before them, revealing the raw fear and sorrow beneath his calm exterior. In that instant, the ordinary classroom transformed into something far more profound, a space where truth and vulnerability collided. Mr. Daniels let out a shaky breath and sank into the edge of his desk, his hands clasped tightly as if holding himself together. He stared at the rows of young faces before him, his voice low but trembling with honesty. "I spend every day teaching you about government, about how nations rise and fall, but what keeps me awake at night," he confessed, "is wondering if you'll inherit a world where kindness has no place." His words seemed to hang in the air, heavier than any assignment, more urgent than any exam. A few students shifted uncomfortably, not because they were bored, but because they weren't used to seeing him this way. Vulnerability wasn't on the syllabus. He looked down at the floor, blinking rapidly, as if ashamed of the tears threatening to fall. "I want to give you more than facts and dates," he continued softly. "I want to believe there's a future where compassion still matters, where you can take what you've learned and use it to build something better." The room, usually alive with the scrape of chairs and the buzz of side conversations, was utterly still. Even the students who rarely paid attention couldn't look away. For the first time, they weren't hearing a lecture, they were hearing a plea. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about people. It was about them. And in that stillness, something shifted. The boundary between teacher and student faded, replaced by a fragile but powerful understanding. The silence stretched until a voice rose from the back of the room. It was Jordan, the quiet kid who rarely spoke unless called on. His words were hesitant at first, but clear. "But, you've already taught us compassion. You show up for us every single day, even when you're tired. That matters." The teacher blinked, caught off guard, his breath hitching. Before he could respond, another hand shot up near the window. "Yeah," Maya added, "you're the reason I even believe I can make a difference. You don't just teach us history, you remind us we're part of it." The shift was sudden, almost electric. One by one, voices joined in, not out of obligation but from a place of truth. "You told me I could be the first in my family to go to college. You stayed after school when I was struggling. You believed in us when we didn't believe in ourselves." Their words poured into the room, filling the cracks that had just moments ago been lined with despair. Mr. Daniels sat frozen, his hand pressed to his chest, as though trying to steady a heart overwhelmed by the outpouring. The students weren't simply responding to a broken lecture, they were holding up a mirror to their teacher, showing him the impact he had already made. And as their voices layered over one another, a realization spread: these young people weren't powerless at all. They had already begun to carry the lessons forward, not in their notebooks, but in their lives. For a moment, Mr. Daniels could only sit in stunned silence, his eyes darting from one student to another as their words echoed through the room. His lips trembled, and finally, a single tear slipped down his cheek. That was when Alex, sitting in the front row, slowly pushed back his chair and stood. The sound of the chair legs scraping against the floor was sharp in the stillness. Everyone turned. Alex didn't speak, he just clapped, his palms striking together with quiet conviction. A heartbeat later, Maya rose too, her eyes shining, and joined in. Then Jordan. Then another. Soon, it was like a wave spreading through the classroom, dozens of students rising to their feet, clapping louder and louder, until the sound filled every corner. It wasn't the kind of applause that followed a performance or a lecture. It was raw, unpolished, deeply human. It was gratitude, it was love, it was hope. Mr. Daniels covered his mouth with his hand, shoulders shaking as the weight he had been carrying for so long began to ease. He had come into the room feeling like he had failed them, failed his country, maybe even failed himself. Yet here they stood, his students, rising not just to honor him, but to remind him that what he had planted in them was already growing. Tears blurred his vision as he looked out over the standing, clapping sea of young faces. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel broken. He felt believed in. The applause slowly softened, fading into a hush that felt almost sacred. No one sat down, no one reached for their phones or their bags. The bell rang, shrill and ordinary, but the moment was anything but. Mr. Daniels lowered his hand from his face, his eyes still glistening, and whispered, maybe this is how change begins, with you. His voice was steady now, carried not by duty, but by hope. The students didn't answer right away. They simply stood there, shoulders squared, some with tears in their eyes, others with quiet smiles of resolve. It was as if they understood, without needing to be told, that what had just happened went beyond a single class period. Jordan finally spoke, his tone calm but sure, then we won't let it stop here. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Mr. Daniels looked at them, each one a story still unfolding, each one a possibility. And felt something he hadn't in months, belief in tomorrow. The walls of the classroom, once heavy with sorrow, now seemed to pulse with a new energy, alive with promise. As the students finally began to gather their things, they lingered, slower than usual, as if reluctant to break the bond that had formed. When the last of them left, Mr. Daniels stood alone in the quiet, his heart full. The world outside was still in crisis, yes. But inside that room, he had witnessed something unshakable, compassion rising, hope reborn, and the certainty that humanity could still light the way forward.